Welcome back. Here's the latest update on what is unfolding right now.
You want to keep searching for Lynette. Well, I will need someone with a lot more authority to order me to stop.
I really hope the investigators have this piece of evidence, and that they have analyzed it and compared it to Brian's version of the story, matching the hand-drawn maps he made against the actual path plotted by his GPS watch.
I will always wonder if there was something
I could have done differently. My only job was to protect her, and I failed to do that. So I am going to keep searching for answers now, any way I can. Then early this morning, we received a highly urgent phone call out of the blue,
With their lawyer insisting we act immediately because they were preparing to leave.
When pressed for details, she refused to say exactly where they were headed.
So we rushed to get him on the line, barely managing to squeeze in a few quick questions before they abruptly cut us off.
This case just does not add up, and the more details we uncover,
the deeper the mystery goes.
Brian Hooker maintains he was right there when his wife Lynette fell overboard from the stern of their vessel.
He claims he simply could not pull her back in.
Right from the beginning, local mariners noticed major red flags in his version of events.
A source with direct knowledge of Elbow Cay, where the couple spent their final hours on April 4th,
just one day before she vanished, confirmed that the winds that afternoon were heavy. Right near the channel where they had anchored their boat,
rough currents were swirling, and the gusts were intensifying.
Yet, the sea conditions were hardly severe enough to explain how the two of them became separated so easily.
It is a glaring detail that keeps this whole investigation wide open.
To find the truth,
we will retrace the exact path they reportedly took from Elbow Cay back to their anchored sailboat. This is the very route where Brian claims tragedy struck. We will talk to local sailors and residents along the way, especially those working at the nearby marina,
to find out
if Brian's story can withstand the harsh reality of these dangerous waters. However, one crucial piece of physical evidence stands out, raising massive questions about Brian Hooker's actual timeline.
He claims his dinghy drifted aimlessly for 9 hours while he tried to paddle with a broken oar.
But data from his own GPS watch tells a completely different story.
His stepdaughter, who could access the digital tracking data, shared the actual map, and the results are absolutely shocking.
Instead of the chaotic path you would see from a helpless drifting boat,
the route perfectly matches the direct line his sailboat took from Marsh Harbor to Elbow Cay and back.
It is clean, deliberate, and precise. Certainly not the path of a man lost at sea for half a day. We will bring in a maritime expert to break down this digital data,
checking timestamps and how tracking apps behave out on the ocean before making a final call. Meanwhile, a major twist occurred late that evening.
Just after 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Brian Hooker walked free from jail.
Bahamian authorities kept him locked up for 72 hours,
stretching their original 48-hour hold, but they ultimately lacked the evidence needed to file formal charges.
His detention took place at the Central Police Station on Grand Bahama Island in Freeport.
His defense attorney kept pushing for a resolution, making it clear they had to charge him or set him free.
Once the deadline expired with no charges, pressure began mounting.
And not long after, Brian Hooker walked straight out of the Central Police Station, a free man, at least for the moment.
Now that he was out, the immediate question was, where would he go? He had been living aboard his sailboat, a 46-foot vessel named Soulmate, which he and Lynette moored near a local marina to access their dockside facilities. The boat sat empty there while he was locked up in Freeport, Grand Bahama. With nearly 100 miles separating him from his vessel and no flights available that evening, he almost certainly had to spend the night
inside a hotel room before plotting his next move.
The ferry ride takes about 17 hours, making a late-night trip completely out of the question.
The real mystery is what he intends to do next.
He could easily head back to Marsh Harbor, where the Soulmate was anchored and where they spent their lives together.
Or
If he managed to keep his passport, he could flee the Bahamas altogether.
But remember, just because Bahamian police released him does not mean this active investigation is closed.
It just means that right now, prosecutors do not have enough evidence to charge him. The file remains wide open, and detectives will surely track his every move. Armed with his passport, Brian Hooker had to make a pivotal choice after leaving custody. Stay and cooperate, or run before things get worse.
The chance that he might slip away to a country
lacking an extradition treaty is something his own lawyers must have discussed.
For now, those private talks stay strictly behind closed doors.
On the defense side, his lawyer tackled the most pressing question hanging over this mystery. Did Brian ever show physical aggression toward Lynette?
According to his counsel, Brian flatly denies all those accusations.
Looking back at a 2015 incident,
His lawyer pointed out that Lynette was actually the one arrested back then, not Brian.
The defense also dismissed the heavy claims raised by Brian's stepdaughters,
arguing that grief, prescription meds, and external pressure might be clouding their memory.
We also need to map out the exact timeline of events.
The trouble started on April 4th, around 7:30 in the evening.
According to Brian, he drifted aimlessly until about 4 a.m. on April 5th.
Yet, police did not actually detain him until several days later.
Likely on Wednesday evening, giving him plenty of time alone on his boat before being arrested. During those critical days, Brian reached out to several close friends.
These recorded calls, captured before his arrest, provide a rare look at his story.
Right after Lynette vanished, casting even more doubt on his original version of events.
Between Lynette's sudden disappearance and his arrest, Brian was definitely not sitting idle.
In fact, messages he sent to friends right after the tragedy.
He got back to his dinghy and used it to return to the sailboat.
And then sailed back to Marsh Harbor, tying up to his mooring buoy just like any normal day.
That detail is incredibly telling.
Instead of a traumatized husband waiting for police, Brian was out sailing immediately after his wife disappeared.
Those texts sent to his inner circle reveal a very specific picture of someone
simply carrying on with normal life while a massive search was underway for Lynette.
What is also fascinating is how those messages went public.
His closest friends chose to release them.
Whether driven by deep concern or hoping to clear his name, they made the choice to share them.
Along with those text messages, a phone call Brian made right after Lynette vanished also emerged. During the call, he lays out the timeline of that fateful night in incredible detail. To some listeners, his explanation sounds quite reasonable. But others hear a highly guarded and defensive man who just lost his wife.
This recorded call adds a troubling layer to an already complex mystery, leaving us to wonder
if Brian is actually processing deep grief or something far more calculated.
Speaking to his friends, Brian recounted the night of Lynette's disappearance in his own words.
By his account, she was thrown off the back of the dinghy when sudden winds spiked to 20 knots.
He claims she attempted to swim toward their sailboat, which lay about 1,000 yards out.
He claims he screamed for her and fired 2 emergency flares, but got no reply and lost her in the dark. From this point on, his narrative becomes much harder to follow. Brian even shared hand-drawn maps with those very same friends. He sketched these during the 4 days between Lynette's disappearance and his arrest, tracking his own dangerous drift across the open ocean with nothing but a broken oar.
His friends eventually handed those maps to the media, and they were broadcast by CBS News.
At first glance, this looks like an attempt to document a deeply traumatic event.
But to seasoned investigators who analyze these kinds of cases, such meticulous effort actually raises a different question.
Rather than dedicating every second to finding Lynette, Brian spent hours building a detailed visual defense of his location, almost as if he knew his story would soon be questioned. In investigations like this
level of unprompted over-explanation is incredibly telling.
It shifts the focus from a grieving husband desperate for answers to someone carefully controlling a narrative.
The sketches Brian gave to his friends feature red lines,
plotting the exact route of his dinghy during those 9 hours at sea.
without any power, because he claims Lynette fell overboard with the boat's electric key.
But then there is the other map, the real one.
Brian's tracking watch automatically recorded his actual movements, and his stepdaughter Carly Ellsworth had full access to those coordinates. She was tracking his live coordinates in real time, watching a digital trail form a continuous line. This satellite data tells a vastly different story than the hand-drawn maps he sent to friends.
What jumps out immediately is just how clean those lines are.
The satellite route plots a clear path from Marsh Harbor to Elbow Cay,
A well-known spot, famous for its restaurants and anchorages, before heading straight back.
That specific stretch of the track makes sense. A quick day trip out and back would look just like that. But the real trouble starts next.
If Brian really spent 9 hours drifting helplessly with a broken oar and dead engine, the GPS track should be chaotic, erratic, and completely unpredictable.
Instead, those lines look structured and deliberate. Investigators will need a marine expert to analyze this smartwatch data more closely, checking every timestamp to see what this route actually proves. Yet even before that deeper analysis,
This initial picture is very hard to square with Brian's official story.
the digital trail from his own wrist might end up being the smoking gun in this whole investigation. That return path recorded on his watch is where the story completely falls apart.
Brian claims he drifted for hours in pitch blackness with a snapped oar and no engine.
Unable to steer, entirely at the mercy of the wind and ocean currents.
If that was true, the GPS track would be a chaotic mess, not a clean, controlled path. Instead, the smartwatch data shows a return path almost perfectly tracing the outbound course Soulmate took to Elbow Cay. Almost the exact same track and direction, showing the steady precision you would expect from a powered vessel using GPS navigation. When sailing with active GPS, your course looks tight and highly deliberate. When you are drifting helplessly in a tiny dinghy, it looks nothing like that.
There is one major catch, though.
Those timestamps on the GPS watch data must still be verified against Brian's official timeline.
Specifically, that critical window between 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m.
Until an expert in nautical tracking confirms those times, we cannot jump to solid conclusions.
Bringing in that expert is the next step.
An experienced mariner will dissect the digital tracking data to figure out exactly what was logged and when. One massive question remains.
Do investigators already have this GPS data, and have they compared it to Brian's hand-drawn maps?
Because if the electronics tell a completely different story than what Brian claimed, that contradiction could change everything as this criminal investigation moves forward. The digital trail Brian left behind did not just slip away.
And it was actually his stepdaughter, Carly Ellsworth, who saved it and handed it over. Beyond that smartwatch data,
Disturbing text messages Brian sent to friends right after Lynette disappeared have also come to light. And those friends decided to share them with reporters, revealing a fascinating look at how Brian was managing the narrative in those early days. In one text, a friend reached out after seeing the news, asking if it was really them. Brian answered immediately. He claimed Lynette fell from the dinghy in rough seas while heading back to their boat, arguing that strong winds pushed him away and that she swam toward the yacht before they lost sight of each other at dusk. He said he drifted and rowed, using a single oar for 7 hours before finally washing ashore on a nearby island to find help. He ended by saying the family was devastated and that search teams had scanned multiple sectors that day with no luck. At first glance, the text feels deeply grief-stricken and open, but several critical details raise major red flags. The story he told friends aligns almost perfectly with the story he later gave police.
It felt almost too rehearsed for a man who just lost his wife. The precise details,
The remarkably calm tone and the deliberate framing caught the attention of investigators.
Was Brian simply trying to update everyone during a horrific crisis?
or was he carefully building an alibi from day one? That is what detectives are still trying to figure out.
As the messages kept coming over the next few days, their tone became even more revealing.
By Monday night,
Just 24 hours after Lynette supposedly fell overboard near Elbow Cay around 7:30 p.m.
Meanwhile, Brian was texting friends about the search, mentioning that rescue crews would head back out tomorrow, but warning that a storm on Wednesday might halt everything. The next morning, right after 8 a.m.,
A concerned friend reached out, asking if he needed a place to sleep and offering help.
Brian answered with total, chilling composure. He wrote that he had already sailed his boat back to Marsh Harbor once the fire department returned his dinghy. He was sleeping aboard Soulmate, tied to a mooring ball, but noted his sister and brother-in-law were arriving that morning, and he would likely stay with them for a bit.
He added that he planned to rejoin the search once the storm cleared up.
Yet again, the tone is deeply unsettling. Barely 36 hours after his wife vanished, sparking quiet suspicion in the Bahamas community. Brian was busy discussing logistics, referencing mooring lines, organizing family arrivals,
and even casually congratulating a friend who just bought a new sailboat.
Congratulating him and politely acknowledging their offer of help.
To some, such extreme calm after a tragic loss is just deep shock or a coping strategy.
To others, it signals a chilling lack of grief, as if the tragedy had not even registered.
Either way, these texts build a troubling picture that homicide detectives will study with intense scrutiny.
But one specific detail in those texts demands closer attention: his claim that the fire department returned his dinghy.
To understand why, we have to look at the geography.
The couple was based in Marsh Harbor, keeping their yacht, Soulmate, tied up near a local marina.
For their day excursion, they sailed over to Elbow Cay, a long, narrow strip of land miles away,
Anchored in the deep water, and took their tiny 8-foot dinghy to travel back and forth. According to Brian, his wife disappeared during that short dinghy ride back to their anchored boat.
He claims he drifted all night before finally washing ashore on the Marsh Harbor coastline,
Trekking through thick brush and wild terrain to get help.
The small boat, he said, was recovered and returned by local authorities, but that raises a glaring question. How exactly did he get back to Soulmate?
The dinghy he used is just a small, low-powered tender.
Navigating that tiny vessel all the way back to the anchored sailboat.
Near Elbow Cay is simply not a realistic option.
The only logical scenario is that he took a local ferry to cross that distance,
And then paid someone to hitch a ride out to his yacht before sailing Soulmate back to Marsh Harbor.
Here is the critical takeaway. Lynette never set foot on that sailboat again.
Brian did, without her, quietly sailing the vessel back home. This timeline, when laid bare, adds a chilling layer to a mystery that still raises far more questions than answers. There is something incredibly unsettling about Brian's movements during those 4 days, as rescue crews scanned the deep waters near Elbow Cay for any sign of Lynette.
Brian had already guided Soulmate back to its slip at the Marsh Harbor Marina,
Positioned far outside the active search zone. He did not drop anchor anywhere near where his wife vanished. He didn't stay nearby to help the search. Returning to his routine slip miles away felt like business as usual. The real question is why. Anchoring is free, and safe harbors are everywhere throughout those Bahamian waters. There was absolutely no logical reason to sail all the way back to his slip, especially while crews were still actively searching for his missing wife.
It is a choice that looks incredibly tone-deaf at best and deeply suspicious at worst.
Back in America, Lynette's family refused to wait around in silence. Right around the moment Brian was let go from custody,
Her relatives were already working closely with federal investigators in America.
The United States Coast Guard was already assisting with the active investigation, and there are strong signs that other federal agencies are stepping in too.
This is legally critical. When an American citizen dies abroad under suspicious circumstances or is suspected of involvement in a death, federal agencies have clear grounds to launch a parallel investigation. Their legal reach does not vanish just because another government releases a suspect.
It is clear that the investigation on both sides is far from finished.
For Lynette's loved ones,
All hope now lies with federal investigators building a case that the Bahamian police simply cannot make stick.
from a legal standpoint, there is one crucial detail to understand.
There is simply no statute of limitations on murder.
If detectives truly believe a crime took place,
They are not racing a deadline, only the hard realities of gathering evidence across borders.
the 72-hour hold requested by Bahamian police soon expired.
And without enough solid proof to file charges, they could not legally detain Brian any longer.
But how that critical deadline unfolded speaks volumes about this case.
When investigators keep someone detained until the final seconds,
It usually means they are certain they are onto something.
They simply have not been able to lock down the proof yet.
If the evidence were ironclad, charges would have been filed days ago. Running down the clock suggests that police were desperate for a breakthrough in those final hours.
It never came, and Brian walked free. That does not mean this case is dead. Investigators are still gathering evidence. The digital watch data, the texts, the Jeep tracking on the Jeep, his conflicting stories, all of it is still being analyzed.
Investigators in both countries are going to be tracking Brian's every move from this point forward. For Lynette's grieving family, the search for truth is only beginning. As this dark mystery continues to unfold, we will be following every detail live from the ground in the Bahamas.
there is another reason why Bahamian police hesitated to rush into filing charges.
In most legal systems based on British common law, like the United States and the Bahamas, anyone accused of a crime has the right to a reasonably speedy trial.
That means the moment charges are filed, the clock starts ticking.
Prosecutors must be sure they can build a rock-solid case before that window closes.
Moving too fast with weak evidence means the prosecution could fall apart long before it ever reaches a courtroom.
That is why detectives often wait. They do not doubt that a crime occurred. They just want to make sure the evidence they bring to court is absolutely ironclad.
It is a slow, strategic game.
And in an active investigation with so many blind spots, rushing to judgment ruins everything.
With Brian now walking free, the biggest mystery is what he will do next. He still has his 46-foot sailboat, which served as his and Lynette's full-time home.
The vessel, named Soulmate, is more than a valuable asset. It represents the life they built together. Right now, it is anchored out in Marsh Harbor, roughly 100 miles away, which is an hour by plane or a long ferry ride.
Whether Brian goes back to that vessel, tries to flee the Bahamas, or stays put to cooperate with detectives will tell us exactly where this case is heading.
His next decision could be the most revealing.
One yet.